She gave him everything: love, wealth, and power. But what he did in return will leave you speechless. This is the story that no one saw coming. Port Harcourt was a city of dreams, wealth, and power. Among its many stories, none shone brighter or darker than that of Nedima Okafor, known simply as Nedi. She was the epitome of wealth and elegance, her life set within the golden gates of a mansion that symbolized her success. Yet, within this palace of marble floors and crystal chandeliers, a story unfolded that would shake the foundations of affluence. Nedi's only son, Emeka, was her pride and joy, the jewel in her crown of luxury. From the moment he was born, she lavished him with everything: golden rattles, silk blankets, and a nursery adorned with real gold accents. As he grew, so did his appetite for extravagance, and Nedi spared no expense. Tutors, sports cars, and gadgets filled his life, leaving no room for discipline. The first cracks in Emeka's character showed when he was 10. He shattered the principal's office window after being scolded for tardiness. When summoned, Nedi arrived in her gleaming SUV, towering over the principal in her designer sunglasses. "My son must have had a reason," she declared, brushing off the incident. The principal's warnings of future troubles fell on deaf ears. Her unconditional defense of Emeka created a monster, entitled and untouchable. By age 15, Emeka ruled over their household with impunity. He disrespected staff, bullied classmates, and demanded whatever he pleased. Yet Nedi only saw the golden child she adored, shielding him from every consequence. But trouble was brewing, a storm ready to shatter the illusion of control. Unbeknownst to Nedi, her refusal to discipline her son was planting seeds of ruin that would one day grow into an uncontrollable beast. As Emeka entered his teenage years, his behavior grew more reckless. Fueled by his mother's unwavering protection, he treated the world as his playground. His fleet of luxury cars roared through the streets of Port Harcourt, earning him both admiration and fear. Nights at exclusive clubs and extravagant parties became routine, and his reputation as the untouchable prince spread. It wasn't long before his disregard for others escalated. One evening, Uju, the family's loyal nanny, found herself the target of Emeka's twisted humor. What began as inappropriate jokes turned physical when Emeka grabbed her in a way no boy his age should. In shock, Uju reacted instinctively, slapping him across the face. But Nedi's response was swift and cruel. When she heard Uju's side of the story, she dismissed it, choosing instead to punish the nanny. "How dare you lay your hands on my son?" she snapped, slapping Uju and firing her on the spot. The incident sent ripples through the household. Staff began leaving one by one, unwilling to endure Emeka's cruelty and Nedi's blind loyalty to him. Yet, Nedi remained unmoved, believing her wealth could silence anyone who dared to oppose her family. Meanwhile, Emeka grew bolder, pushing boundaries without fear of consequences. By 18, he was untamed, a prince ruling a kingdom built on fear and money. But even the mightiest kingdoms crumble, and Emeka's reign was destined for a fall. Despite her sister's warnings, Nedi remained steadfast in her defense of Emeka. She believed that her love and wealth would always be enough to protect him. However, behind the golden gates of their mansion, shadows of scandal began to creep in. It started when Emeka's reckless behavior led to the pregnancy of Ifunanya, a promising university student from a humble background. Ifunanya had fallen for his charm, believing his sweet words and lavish gifts were signs of love. But when she revealed her pregnancy, Emeka laughed in her face. Desperate and ashamed, Ifunanya sought out Nedi, hoping the influential woman would convince her son to take responsibility. Instead, Neddy humiliated her, flinging money at her feet and ordering the guards to throw her out. "Get rid of it," Neddy commanded, sealing her fate with cold indifference. But Ifunanya refused to give up. With the support of her friend, she resolved to keep the baby, despite the uncertainty and fear that clouded her future. As months passed, more women came forward with similar stories of betrayal and pregnancies, yet Neddy dismissed them all, blaming the women and shielding Emeka from accountability. Unbeknownst to her, the whispers of scandal were growing louder, spreading beyond the mansion's gates. The seeds of ruin had been planted, and soon Neddy's golden world would come crashing down. Emeka's reckless lifestyle spiraled further out of control. Alcohol, parties, and gambling filled his nights while his days were spent nursing hangovers. But the breaking point came when his actions crossed into violence. One fateful night, Emeka preyed upon a vulnerable girl named Uli, leaving her traumatized and broken. When Uli reported the incident to the police, she had no idea that her father, Chief Oko, was one of the most powerful men in the country. The scandal exploded. Police officers swarmed the Okafor mansion, arresting Emeka for assault and Neddy for bribery when she attempted to pay off the authorities. News of the arrest spread like wildfire, turning the once revered Neddy into a pariah. In the interrogation room, Neddy came face to face with someone from her past, Uju, her former nanny, now a high-ranking police officer. With a cold, unwavering voice, Uju reminded Neddy of the years she spent protecting Emeka while turning a blind eye to his abuses. "You thought your wealth could silence us forever," Uju said, pulling out a recording of Neddy offering bribes. "But this time, there's no escape." For the first time, Neddy's walls of power and privilege began to crumble. She sat in stunned silence as the evidence mounted, realizing that the consequences she had shielded her son from had finally caught up with both of them. The courtroom was filled with murmurs as Neddy and Emeka stood trial. The evidence was overwhelming: audio recordings, testimonies from victims, and bank records exposing years of bribery and cover-ups. The once revered Okafor name became synonymous with disgrace. Neddy's fall from grace was swift. Investors pulled out, her business empire collapsed, and her mansion was seized. The woman who had once ruled over Port Harcourt now stood in shackles, reduced to a common criminal. Emeka's fate was sealed when the court sentenced him to 25 years in prison for rape, assault, and multiple offenses. Neddy received 10 years for obstruction of justice and bribery. As they were escorted out of the courtroom, the crowd jeered, their anger echoing through the halls. Months in prison stripped Neddy of her pride and power. She shared cramped cells with women whose stories mirrored those of her son's victims. Each day reminded her of the consequences of shielding Emeka from accountability. Emeka, too, faced harsh realities. The luxury he had once enjoyed was gone, replaced by cold concrete walls and prison uniforms. He learned the hard way that actions have consequences, lessons he had been shielded from all his life. Both mother and son were left to grapple with their downfall, but redemption, if it existed, seemed a distant dream. Years passed, and the world moved on, but Neddy and Emeka remained frozen in time, trapped by the weight of their past. Neddy's release from prison came after 10 long years. She was no longer the glamorous socialite, but a frail, broken woman whose wealth had vanished. She returned to Port Harcourt, where her name had become a cautionary tale. Stripped of her mansion and fortune, she sought refuge at her sister's modest home. Lamara welcomed her with compassion, though the scars of Neddy's arrogance lingered. Emeka, still serving his sentence, had transformed. Once feared and envied, he was now a shadow of himself, haunted by regrets and memories of lives he had destroyed. Letters from his mother carried stories of her struggles, but he remained distant, unsure how to reconcile his guilt. Neddy's days were spent reflecting on the past, how she had built her son into a monster and destroyed his future with her own hands. She visited Emeka in prison, and for the first time, they shed tears instead of anger. "Forgive me, my son," she wept, her voice trembling. "I thought I was protecting you, but I failed you." Emeka's response was broken yet sincere. "We both failed, Mama, but maybe we can learn to live with it." Hope flickered, but the road to redemption was long and uncertain. Episode 2. After serving 25 years, Emeka finally walked out of prison, a free man, but a stranger to the world he once ruled. The streets of Port Harcourt had changed, and the luxury he once flaunted was replaced by unfamiliar faces and structures. He returned to his mother's modest home, stunned by the stark contrast to the mansion he had grown up in. Neddy, now older and frailer, greeted him with trembling hands and tear-filled eyes. They embraced, but the weight of their past loomed heavy between them. Determined to rebuild his life, Emeka set out to find work. However, his criminal record followed him like a shadow. Each rejection reminded him of the damage he had caused. Days turned into weeks, and despair began to creep in until he stumbled upon a cleaner wanted sign outside a towering office building. Desperation led him inside, where he secured the job. What he didn't know was that the company belonged to Ifunanya, the woman he had wronged years ago. She had risen from poverty to become one of the most influential women in the state. Emeka scrubbed floors and emptied bins, hiding his identity as he tried to prove himself. He carried shame in every step, but worked tirelessly, hoping to find forgiveness, not from others, but from himself. Emeka's days as a cleaner were long and grueling, but he clung to the work as his lifeline. He avoided eye contact with executives and kept his head down, hoping no one would recognize him. Yet fate had other plans. One afternoon, while polishing floors near the executive offices, he froze. A portrait of Ifunanya, the CEO, hung proudly on the wall. She looked regal and confident, her success a stark contrast to the broken man he had become. Panic gripped Emeka. Could she have known he worked there? Would she cast him out as he had once cast her aside? He debated quitting, but ultimately decided to stay. He needed this job, and more importantly, he needed redemption. Later that evening, as Emeka cleaned the executive hallway, he heard footsteps. He turned to see Ifunanya herself standing before him. Her eyes widened in recognition, but her face remained unreadable. "You," she said softly, her voice carrying both surprise and strength. Emeka dropped the mop and fell to his knees. "Ifunanya, I'm sorry for everything." Her gaze lingered on him before she turned and walked away, leaving Emeka to wonder if his sins could ever be forgiven. Days passed after Emeka's encounter with Ifunanya, but she never spoke of it. Instead, she observed him quietly, watching as he cleaned with diligence and humility. Yet Emeka could feel her presence, her eyes piercing through the weight of his guilt. One evening, Ifunanya called Emeka into her office. He stood awkwardly near the door, unsure of what awaited him. "You've worked hard here," she began, her voice steady but sharp. "But I need to know, what are you really looking for?" Emeka hesitated, his eyes darting to the framed photo of her son on her desk. The boy looked familiar, too familiar. His breath caught in his throat. "Is he?" Emeka started, but his words trailed off. Ifunanya's gaze hardened. "You don't get to ask about my son," she snapped. "You lost that right the day you abandoned us." Tears welled in Emeka's eyes. "I'm sorry. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just want to be near him, to see him grow." For the first time, Ifunanya's expression softened. She looked away, her shoulders trembling. "He doesn't know about you, and I intend to keep it that way." Emeka nodded, understanding the boundaries she had set, yet longing for a chance to redeem himself in their lives. Emeka's days continued in quiet labor, scrubbing floors and avoiding eye contact. Yet his mind lingered on the boy in Ifunanya's photo, the boy who looked eerily like him. One evening, while Ifunanya worked late, Emeka overheard a heated argument between her and the boy, whose name was Chidi. Chidi stormed out of her office and collided with Emeka in the hallway. "Watch where you're going!" Chidi snapped, but Emeka froze. The resemblance was undeniable. Chidi's sharp jawline, dark eyes, and mannerisms mirrored his own. Before he could respond, Ifunanya appeared. "Chidi, that's enough!" she shouted. She shot Emeka a warning glare, silently urging him to walk away. But Chidi turned back, his voice trembling. "Why don't you ever tell me the truth about my father?" Ifunanya's eyes widened in panic, and Emeka's heart raced. The secret that had been buried for decades was clawing its way to the surface. Ifunanya pulled Chidi into her office, closing the door behind them. Emeka, left outside, leaned against the wall, struggling to control his emotions. Inside the office, Chidi's voice echoed through the door. "Who is he, Mom? Why won't you tell me?" Ifunanya's voice trembled. "You don't need to know." "But I do," Chidi shouted. "Why does he look like me? Why do I feel like I already know him?" Emeka couldn't take it anymore. He knocked on the door and stepped inside without waiting for permission. "Because I'm your father," he said, his voice breaking. Chidi froze, his eyes darting between Emeka and his mother. Ifunanya's face fell, and tears streamed down her cheeks. "You don't get to claim him now," she hissed. "You lost that right when you abandoned me." Emeka stepped closer. "I know I failed you, Ifunanya. I failed both of you, but I'm not the man I used to be. Please just let me explain." But Chidi wasn't listening. He shoved past Emeka and stormed out of the office, leaving both his parents standing in stunned silence. Chidi ran through the building, his vision blurred by tears. Emeka followed, calling out his name, but the boy didn't stop. The echoes of his footsteps filled the halls until he burst out into the parking lot. "Chidi, wait!" Emeka pleaded, finally catching up and grabbing his arm. "Don't touch me!" Chidi yelled, yanking his arm free. "You don't get to show up now and pretend to care." Emeka stood frozen, his chest heaving. "You're right," he said softly. "I don't deserve to be your father, but I need you to know the truth. I never stopped thinking about you." Chidi's anger wavered, but his guard remained up. "Then why weren't you there?" Emeka swallowed hard. "Because I was a fool, a selfish, reckless man who let pride ruin everything. I paid for it, Chidi. I paid for it every single day." Ifunanya arrived just as Chidi turned away again. She stepped between them, her voice sharp. "That's enough. He doesn't need this right now." But Chidi's voice cut through her anger. "I need answers, Mom, not more secrets." For the first time, Ifunanya faltered. "Then give me time," she whispered. The silence that followed hung heavy in the air as the fractured family stood under the fading sunlight, unsure of what would come next. Did Chidi finally reconcile with his father? To uncover the rest of this gripping story, stay tuned for Episode 3. Episode 3. Confronting Shadows. Chidi locked himself in his room that night, staring at the reflection in his mirror. For the first time, he saw the pieces of himself that didn't match his mother. The sharp jawline, the deep-set eyes, and the curl of his lips. They were his father's features. Meanwhile, Emeka sat in his tiny apartment, tormented by the confrontation. He replayed Chidi's words over and over. His heart ached, not just for his son, but for the years he had lost. Ifunanya, too, was restless. She stood in the doorway of Chidi's room, watching the shadows dance across his face as he refused to look at her. "Chidi," "Please," she whispered. He finally turned, tears brimming in his eyes. "Why did you lie to me?" "I wanted to protect you," she said. "I didn't want you to grow up with the shadow of his mistakes." "But what about me?" Chidi snapped. "Did I ever get a say in this? He might have been a monster, but I had a right to know." Ifunanya knelt before him, tears streaming down her face. "You're right, and I'm sorry. But I need you to know that I loved you enough to give you the life he couldn't." Outside the apartment, Emeka stood silently. He had come to try and speak to Chidi again, but froze when he overheard their conversation. With tears in his eyes, he walked away, vowing to earn his son's respect, even if it took the rest of his life. The following week, Chidi avoided both his parents. He buried himself in school and extracurricular activities, but his thoughts betrayed him. His father's voice echoed in his mind. One afternoon, Chidi came face to face with Emeka again. Emeka had waited outside the school, hoping for a chance to speak. Chidi's initial instinct was to turn away, but something stopped him. "Chidi, I know I'm the last person you want to see," Emeka began, "but I'm not leaving until you hear me out." Chidi's fists clenched. "Why now? Why after all these years?" "I was in prison," Emeka said, his voice breaking. "Not just behind bars, but in my soul. I had to face the monster I'd become, and the people I'd hurt." Chidi hesitated, his expression softening slightly. "What do you want from me?" "I just want a chance to prove to you that I can be better, that I am better," Emeka said. "You don't have to forgive me, but let me earn your respect." The words hung in the air, heavy and raw. Chidi didn't respond, but he didn't walk away either. Chidi's nights were restless. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling as questions tormented him. Could he trust his father? Could a man so broken truly change? The next day, he found himself wandering toward Emeka's workplace. He stood outside the building, watching through the glass windows as his father scrubbed the floors. The image of a man, once proud and untouchable, now reduced to labor, stirred something inside him, a mixture of pity and resentment. When Emeka noticed him, he froze. Their eyes locked, and Chidi felt a strange pull to step inside. But as he reached for the door, a classmate appeared behind him. "Isn't that your dad?" the boy sneered. "The janitor?" Humiliation burned through Chidi's veins. Instead of entering, he turned and walked away. Emeka's heart sank, but he didn't follow. He had learned that forcing his presence would only push Chidi further away. Later that night, Chidi couldn't shake the shame he felt, not for Emeka, but for himself. Despite everything, part of him wanted to see his father rise from the ashes, yet he was terrified of what it might mean if he let him back in. Days turned into weeks, and Chidi's frustration grew. It wasn't just his father, it was everything. The lies, the betrayal, the weight of secrets he had never asked for. One evening, after a heated argument with Ifunanya, Chidi stormed out of the house. He wandered the streets until he found himself outside a bar. The neon lights and loud music called to him, promising escape. Inside, the world blurred. Drink after drink, Chidi tried to drown his thoughts, but they only grew louder. When a stranger approached and offered him something stronger, Chidi didn't hesitate. Hours later, Emeka received a frantic call from Ifunanya. Chidi had been found unconscious in the alley behind the bar. Emeka rushed to the hospital, his heart pounding in fear. He found Ifunanya sitting by Chidi's hospital bed, her face streaked with tears. "This is my fault," she whispered. "I pushed him too hard. I made him carry my pain." Emeka knelt beside her, placing a trembling hand on hers. "No, Ifunanya. This is on both of us. We failed him, but we still have a chance to fix it." As Chidi stirred, groaning softly, Emeka vowed to fight harder, not just for redemption, but for his son's future. Chidi's hospital room was filled with the steady hum of machines and the faint scent of antiseptic. Emeka and Ifunanya sat on either side of his bed, their hearts weighed down by fear and guilt. When Chidi finally opened his eyes, relief washed over both parents. But the look he gave them was one of exhaustion, not forgiveness. "You shouldn't be here," Chidi whispered, his voice weak as he stared at Emeka. "I know," Emeka said, his voice trembling. "But I'm not leaving, not this time." Ifunanya gently squeezed Chidi's hand. "We both made mistakes, baby, but we're here now. Please give us a chance to make it right." Tears welled in Chidi's eyes, but he didn't respond. He turned his head away, leaving Emeka and Ifunanya to wonder if the bridge between them was already too broken to rebuild. The hospital released Chidi after a week, but the scars, both physical and emotional, ran deep. He refused to speak to Emeka and barely acknowledged Ifunanya. The walls around his heart had only grown stronger. Desperate to make amends, Emeka sought advice from an unlikely source, his former prison mate Daniel, a man who had rebuilt his life after release. "You can't force forgiveness," Daniel warned. "You have to prove it with actions, not words." Taking Daniel's advice, Emeka doubled his efforts. He worked overtime to save money, hoping to fund Chidi's college education. He volunteered at shelters, trying to confront his past and reshape his future. But no matter how hard he tried, Chidi remained distant. One evening while walking home, Emeka was attacked by two men demanding money. When he refused, they beat him savagely, leaving him bleeding in an alley. It was Chidi, out for a late-night walk, who found him. Seeing his father broken and vulnerable stirred something within Chidi. He called for an ambulance and rode with Emeka to the hospital, his heart pounding as memories of the past flooded back. When Emeka regained consciousness, Chidi was by his side. "Why didn't you fight back?" Chidi asked, his voice trembling. Emeka managed a weak smile. "Because I've already done enough fighting for the wrong reasons. I'm done being that man." Tears streamed down Chidi's face. "I don't know how to forgive you," he admitted. "Then don't," Emeka whispered. "Just let me be here." While Emeka healed, Ifunanya dug deeper into the attack. She suspected it wasn't random. Her fears were confirmed when she discovered Emeka's former associates, men he had crossed during his criminal past, were behind it. Terrified, she warned Emeka to leave town, but he refused. "I'm done running," he said. "I'll face whatever comes." As tensions escalated, Chidi began to see his father not as the monster he once despised, but as a man trying to change. However, his transformation didn't come without consequences. One night, the same men broke into Ifunanya's house, threatening her and Chidi. Emeka arrived just in time to defend them, fighting off the intruders despite his injuries. When the police arrived, Emeka was arrested along with the attackers, as his criminal record cast doubt on his innocence. Chidi and Ifunanya raced to the station, pleading with authorities to release him, but it seemed Emeka's past refused to let him go. In the courtroom, Emeka faced judgment once more. However, this time he had witnesses, Ifunanya, Chidi, and others who testified to his transformation. The judge, moved by Emeka's efforts to rebuild his life, sentenced the attackers to prison and released Emeka under probation. For the first time, Chidi embraced his father outside the courthouse. "Maybe I can't forget," he said, "but I'm ready to try forgiving." Months later, Emeka started a community center for at-risk youth, determined to stop others from repeating his mistakes. Chidi began volunteering there, and Ifunanya slowly let her guard down. Though scars remained, their story became one of hope, proving that redemption doesn't erase the past. It transforms it into something worth fighting for. Months after the trial, Emeka stood in the center of the community hall he had built. The walls were decorated with murals of resilience and transformation, artwork created by the youth he mentored. Chidi stood by his side, handing out flyers for their newest outreach program. Ifunanya watched from a distance, pride and hope warming her heart. She had seen Emeka fall, but now she saw him rise, not as the man he used to be, but as the man he was becoming. Chidi approached her with a smile. "You should join us inside," he said. Ifunanya hesitated, but then stepped forward. She knew this was not just Emeka's redemption, it was hers too. Together, they walked into the hall, leaving the shadows of their past behind them. Thank you for watching and joining us on this incredible journey. Be sure to explore more of our stories on the channel or click on the next video YouTube recommends. If this story touched your heart, please like, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more captivating African tales. Don't forget to tap the notification bell to stay connected to the wisdom and beauty of these stories. Until next time, stay blessed and keep shining.